It's very important for us as folks that will be early responders, not necessarily first responders, that we understand how the hierarchy, the chain of command works. So just a little bit of an overview. I have several short pieces to this to give to you. And then we'll be able to break, we'll have lunch, and we've got a great afternoon planned for you. So things actually get better during the day. Our course goal is to demonstrate a basic knowledge of the incident command system. Incident command system, like psychological first aid, could become an entire career path. And it can be very complex and very, very involved. We want to just have some basic skills and understanding and tools at our fingertips. We want you to be prepared to coordinate with response partners from all levels of government and the private sector. As I've explained this morning, depending on the size of an incident, it can grow to involve many, many different jurisdictions, local, regional, state, cross jurisdiction from one community to another, cross state and national. So what we want to be able to do with ICS is to have you familiar with some of the applications. When do we use it? Organizational principles, how is it set up? And positions and responsibilities that fall under the incident command system. Facilities and functions, what are the different functions of each component, and the planning piece. I'm going to skip different slides as we go through this. If you go on to FEMA.gov, you are welcome to take this. It takes about an hour and a half, and you will get a certificate when you pass. And you probably can't fail because you can take it over and over and over again. And they'll send you a lovely FEMA certificate. You will get a certificate from us today. But if you go onto their website and you take a look at the student manual, it's huge. It's, you know, hundreds of pages long. And we're not going to take you through all of that today. So I'm going to do a little bit of hopscotching around with some of these slides. A little overview, a bit about features and principles, talk to you a little bit about the incident commander and the command staff, some general staff functions, what happens when we put it all together with different groups in what we call unified command, and then we'll close with our summary. Okay. So the three purposes of incident command system and our requirements for using incident command system are what I wanted to share with you at this point. We have specific features and we have specific principles to use. What is ICS? ICS is defined as a standardized, on-scene, all hazards incident management concept. It enables a coordinated response among various jurisdictions and agencies and establishes common processes for planning and management of resources. Allows for integration within a common organizational structure. So for anyone who's planned a big birthday party, a wedding, a holiday event, you know it takes a lot of time and thinking and energy and pulling things together, the logistics of getting the food and preparing and communications, preparing and talking to other people and when they're going to get there and how they're going to get there, how you're going to pay for it. These are all parts of organizing that are the same for things that you've already done in your life that are part of the principles of our national response. So the integration within a common organizational structure and the common processes are a very key component. Don't remind me again. Go away. When is ICS used? ICS can be used for pretty much any scenario, as I just discussed, and sometimes we even do some fun exercises like, let's plan a Thanksgiving dinner for 36 people and use incident command system. appoint an incident commander. Is it going to be the turkey? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be, who are going to be the guest list person? Who's going to be the seating arrangement person? Who's going to buy the groceries? Who's going to do the cooking? Who's going to pay for it? And we set it up and play with it so that we get an idea of, very practical ways to implement our ICS. It can be used for natural hazards, technological hazards, human-caused, man-made, and for planned events. Boston Marathon. July 4th, fireworks. UMass Amherst football game. High school, soccer game. Any event that brings people together can be planned or otherwise. ICS can be used. We define an incident as an occurrence or an event, natural or human caused, that requires a response to protect life or property. Flashback to the life safety code. Me, you, right? Okay. Stabilize the situation, environment, and property. So what is it? What it is National Incident Management System. Our acronym is NIMS, National Incident Management System. Another one of the best kept secrets that government does and has done fairly well is to have a National Incident Management System. Your first responders, small community, rural, urban centers, work under the same guidelines under National Incident Management. It provides a consistent nationwide template. Why? Why do we need a nationwide template? We're Massachusetts, we're East Hampton, Southampton's over there, Northampton's over there. We're individuals, right? And we're proud of it. Why this national template?
You need to be deployed anywhere.
You could be deployed someplace else. So if you're trained and skilled in this spot, this zip code, but you're going to a different zip code, you'd want to be able to know what the rules are, right?
That's right.
Basically, okay? So you may be moving to some, or you may be requesting resources for another area to come and join you, right? So we want to enable our federal, our state, our tribal, local governments, the private sector, businesses are involved in this as well, non-government organizations to work together so that the good folks from the Red Cross and the good folks from the MRC and the good folks from the ambulance and the good folks from the hospital and the good folks from the National Guard have a common structural understanding. How do we use the NIMS? We use it to prepare for, to prevent, to respond to, recover from, and mitigate the effects of incidents, regardless of their cause, the size, the location, or the complexity. So each one of those pieces, and I talk about chunking things into little modules, to prepare, that could be the entire career or the entire department. Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and the entire department is about the preparedness. Another could be about prevention. What are the steps? How do we lobby Congress or our state legislature or our Board of Selectmen for the supplies and what we need to have our prevention, and what data do we collect to be able to make sure that we're accurately assessing and then getting the equipment and the personnel that we need to respond. Regardless of the, responding and recovering, first responders, that's their piece. Not so much the planning and the preparedness, maybe not so much the end piece of the mitigation, depending on where they fall in their hierarchy. The chief, yes, perhaps in planning. But the newer, say, firefighter, they're about response. We want to be able to mitigate these regardless of the causes, as we've talked about, the all hazards, small, medium, and large, specific jurisdiction, an entire geographic region, Hurricane Sandy, right? Irene, different sizes, different scopes. And why do we do it? This is the key part, is in order to reduce the loss of life and property and harm to the environment. So when we talk about our NIMS ICS Incident Command System, again thinking of that umbrella, the National Incident Management System is the big umbrella, and under that is one component, which is Incident Command System. So here's a question for you folks. What would you think might be some common causes of incident response problems?
Dissimilar radio frequencies.
Dissimilar radio frequencies, and I sense, and I'm so intuitive, I sense that you maybe have some experience with that, with their tone of voice and the authority with which you delivered that response.
Yeah, I agree with him.
And we've got a second that motion. So what else? So communication, we could put that under communication. People are talking literally different languages, literally on different frequencies. What are some of the other pieces that might be problematic?
The whole idea that people just show up and say, I'm here to help, or they bring food, or, and they come without being pre-identified or pre-registered, and then we can't really often use their services or what they bring. And then that causes chaos if it happens on a large scale,
Right.
because people are kind.
Yeah.
That's happening in Washington now with a mudslide. A lot of people are self-deploying, and it's becoming a secondary disaster.
It becomes a secondary disaster, precisely. So, good, Mary.
Well, sometimes people come and want to be in charge when they may not.
Oh, what a wonderfully delicate way of putting it. When your bossy know-it-all show up, is that what you're referring to? So sometimes folks show up and I'm all that and I was all this and I can do this and you should do what I say, and not be the person that is designated to that role. And that is extremely problematic. When you start to put different egos in, okay, not even about ego per se, but you put that confusion together, and we now don't know who is the lead person. Well, she says she is, he says he is, I thought they were. It gets very confusing, and that of course leads back to the whole piece about safety. What are some other things? Yes?
We experienced a geography problem. The person in charge out of the bunker in Framingham deployed us to a wrong site. And we had to stay there for 2 hours until we had permission to leave.
And where were you deployed to?
We were deployed to T.J. O'Connor during the hurricane, which was closed, locked, and vacant. And we sat in the parking lot and played cards under a street lamp
Okay.
until we were allowed to go to the Dakin in Springfield.
So might I ask you, do you sort of buy into this concept of incident command system and that it's an important piece for us to
Yes.
be trained with? Yes, okay, that's a great example. When we don't know who is in charge, someone is thinking they are, they're taking the lead in misinformation, misdirection.
But I will say the group stayed together and waited for information to move.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, that was great. That's interesting.
So planning can be confounded. Certainly the operations can be confused, and it increases safety risks, problems. Logistics, delivering, it wasn't funny at the time, but one of the things about smaller emergencies when there are no fatalities is you get to look back sometime and realize, what you did well and what you didn't do well and how things unfolded. And a few years back, we had a propane truck that was going into Osterman's Fuel in Palmer and had an accident and drove into the electric pole. Okay, so it was right at the propane gas company, which has lots of underground fuel. It didn't have fuel, to my knowledge. It was coming back to be refilled. The cab caught on fire. Electricity went out in Wilbraham, Palmer, Munson, da-da-ba-ba-ba-da. Long story short. So we're calling the Red Cross. This is about 6:30, 6 o'clock at night, the Friday after Thanksgiving. And believe me, I was in my pajamas because I'm like in my pajamas when the weather is like that and it's dark. 6:30, you bet. So get a call from the police chief, suit up, MRC, we deploy. We had maybe 100 people come to the school for shelter. Pets came. It was really our first experience in how to handle and manage this. Call the Red Cross. We have, this number of people. We're not sure how long this is going to be going on. They've been evacuated. Police come to the door. Firemen come to the door. Out. It's not powder your nose and, let me fix my makeup and my hair and get my stuff together. No, it's coat, out, go. So folks didn't have medications. We didn't know what we were going to be doing. And that's how many of these situations are, that there's lack of information or it trickles in slowly. So we asked Red Cross to please come and bring some food. It was a cold, dark, dark, dark night. 8 o'clock, no Red Cross, no food. Call them again. Yep, they're on their way. 10 o'clock, no Red Cross, no food. Call them again. They've left. They should have been there. 12 o'clock. At this point, what is going on? 2 deployments to Palmer. They had the Palmer truck and the Munson truck both went to the Palmer shelter. So Munson never got any of the food. We all went home at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning and called it a night. These are problems that happen with communication. So we want to try to reduce these by having some advanced planning. Without ICS, what we typically see, lack of accountability, and that can be from the fiscal component, responsibility, who gave the orders, what direction, who authorized this, poor communication. At best, communications are poor during emergencies or disasters. The Munson story with our first church, which became kind of the iconic picture, the white church that had the steeple destroyed. There was a cell tower. That was a cell tower that serviced the populated part of the village, the downtown. So cell was gone. Our emergency operations center was in the town hall, gone. Okay, so like double, triple handicapped whammo. And we could text, but lines were out. So communication was difficult at best. Unsystematic planning processes, which can come in any kind of an emergency or disaster, and we start just reacting. We're coming from our fight, flight, freeze brain, base of the brain, and just reacting, take care of this, take care of that, and not having the ability to detach and to be able to systemically and systematically deploy resources as needed. And then being unable to, as we've talked about a number of times, to efficiently integrate responders. So ICS, why we like it, why it's important, it helps us because it's, number one, the safety of our responders, our workers, and others. And it helps us to achieve our response objectives. Why? Because we name objectives, and we put a plan together, and then proceed. And it's more efficient. Our region learned a lot about the cost of disasters following the tornadoes, and then Irene, and then the October snow prize. So we found out that we really need to have some accounting of our volunteers. As a coordinator, I want to track how many people stepped up, and we can use those volunteer hours. You become an asset. Communities, if they're going for a federal reimbursement, some kind of reimbursement, the volunteer hours count towards, say, this was our community match. We participated. You are valuable. So, summary, ICS is a standard management tool. It's a management tool for meeting the demands of a small, large, medium, little bear, baby bear, mama bear, papa bear, emergency and non-emergency situations. It represents best practices. It's become the standard for emergency management across the country. And it may be used for planned events, natural disasters, and acts of terrorism. It's a key feature of our NIMS. Okay, for this little unit, we're going to be describing the basic features of our incident command system, talk about our correct terminology for ICS, and identify some common tasks that are related to personal accountability. So looking at our standardized terminology, there's a page I think that I might have in here that I hope to get to that has EMT, and using different acronyms, which we have prolifically ad nauseum, throughout our cultural language. It can very much be confused because what one region, as I said earlier, we are EDSs in Massachusetts, emergency dispensing sites. Well, Oklahoma are their pods. So having those different terms for the same thing can be very confusing. Command is a critical component, and having an established practice and being able to transfer command for an emergency or disaster that's going to have multiple different shifts over time. Certainly people are going to have to stand down and someone take their place and communicate what's our situational reporting, what's our awareness, what are our plans, where do we go the next step. Chain of command, planning, organizational structure. We want to have management by objectives. What are we looking to achieve? Let's put it in writing if we're able to. Sometimes we're not. In the field, it's a disaster. There's no pen, paper, laptops, electricity, etc. Modular, small, groups, chunk down, manageable size, management principles. Span of control, we want to have comprehensive resource management. So for our equipment, for food, supplies that are being deployed, we want to be able to have accountability for that. We want to work towards having integrated communications, information, and intelligence management, and that goes back to our public information officer. Information management, the key component is to have it through one voice, through one person that is designated for that role so that we're not getting multiple messages. And our professionalism. As you work as a Medical Reserve Corps volunteer, as we talked about having our code of conduct, confidentiality, and the behavioral piece is important. We become an extension of our professional boards of health, and we are expected to reflect on that. When we talk about organizational functions, facilities, resources, and titles, we want to, again, use common terminology. So here's my slide. I love this one.
Oh my gosh.
Right. EMT, what's an EMT? Oh, it's an effects management tool. What? It's an email money transfer. It's an emergency management team. It's an emergency medical treatment, an emergency medical technician. Yeah. And El Monte, just in case you're flying out, there's your airport code. So I think that's just, it's beautiful because it puts it very clearly as to what we're challenged with if we are operating from different idiosyncrasies. With command, part of the challenges is establishing and transferring our command and having the chain of command clearly defined. So our command is defined as the directing, the ordering, or the controlling by virtue of explicit statutory, regulatory, or delegated authority. So that's why each community will have an emergency management director that oversees the comprehensive emergency management plan, fire chiefs, deputies, etc., police, chief, deputies, etc., military using chain of command, hierarchy. Chief executive officer is the person who's ultimately responsible, whether that's the first board of selectmen or the chair or the mayor or the governor or the president. The person at the top of the municipal government agency is responsible for understanding this. Now, how many, is anyone else from would you say you're from a rural community? Most of us from rural? Yeah. Okay, so other than, the half a dozen urban centers that we have, gateway cities in Western Massachusetts, we're primarily rural. So we might have volunteer boards of selectmen. We might have volunteer school committees. We have volunteer boards of health, right? Someone running for a selectman school committee and maybe in a position, become a position of authority, they might be running because they really wanted to help with an environmental issue in the community. They didn't like the way the taxation was going on in the community. They are a bicycle repair salesperson or whatever. and they become a selectman or select person and find themselves in the role, if there's an emergency or disaster, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. What do you mean I need to fix a tornado or hurricane? I'm responsible. This is how it's set up, and it's not necessarily someone going to be in that position that has the training and the expertise to do it. When we transfer command, we want to move the responsibility for a command from one incident commander, or the IC, to another. It must include briefings. And a briefing is basically what we talk about, situation awareness, where we're at, what has happened, how many people are deployed, what the safety concerns might be, what's going out to messaging in the community, in the media, what do we see as the next phase of the operation that needs to be accomplished. Command is transferred when a more qualified incident commander arrives. If I'm the first spectator person behind a truck accident, I stop my car, I get out to see what's happening, I could be the incident commander, because at that point I'm the one who's the most knowledgeable on scene functioning. As a police or EMS, fire, somebody else arrives, or somebody who is off duty comes and says, I'm a ER doctor. They may transfer it because they are more qualified. Or a jurisdiction or an agency is legally required to take command. So with Boston Marathon, the Boston Marathon is a City of Boston event. As soon as it became the terrorist, the bomb, the criminal act, it then ramped up immediately to being state level and then to federal level with the terrorism piece. Incident complexity changes. Incidents do not stay static, not for a minute. An incident is either expanding or it's contracting. And even when it's a year after a tornado and people are still out of their homes and it feels to them like nothing has changed, the incident is still moving along a timeline. And the good thing about knowing incident command and knowing how emergency and disasters work, where we fit in, so we get to have an understanding. And as human beings, having information helps with the emotional component of the trauma and everything that gets kicked up with the crisis. I knew when the tornadoes hit that it was going to take a couple of years. And I said to the town administrator, it's going to take 2 to 5 years. And I thought she was going to behead me. Because, why? You don't want to hear that when you haven't had that kind of training, and you want it better now because it's so overwhelming. All of your senses are just overwhelmed. You're depleted emotionally, spiritually, physically. Ugh, disaster all around. You can't imagine that it was ever any different before or that it'll ever be different in the future. But now you know. It does. Move forward. Any thoughts from you folks what you might think you need to include if you're transferring command? Yes, ma'am.
Repeat back the information that you've just delivered. Have her repeat it back.
Oh, I love it. Her suggestion is to have the person who's stepping into the command and their staff perhaps, repeat back so that, that whole listening and affirming and confirming. Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to use that. What other things might be important?
We want a list of deployed resources and ranks and who have you activated, who's under you, so that they can step in and know who to talk to,
Right.
and probably a handful of radios too.
So we want to know where our people, places, and things, where our equipment, our personnel, and where the incident itself is. Is it continuing to expand or is it contracting? Interesting with the Boston Marathon bombing, after the bombs were set off, response began, correct? There's a period of time where it's not known if there's going to be an additional incident, activation, etc. So it appears that it's at one level. That incident then with fugitives continued for a number of days, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same level as the immediate explosive danger, physical safety, but there was another component, that it was still an active situation. So depending on an incident, and until that criminal aspect was contained, folks were asked to shelter in place, which again was a term very, very new to most folks in the Commonwealth. So the transferring of command would require a tremendous amount of information, right? The transfer of command to the next most qualified person, as those incidents changed from medical to security law enforcement, the jurisdiction, moving it from EMS, emergency room, hospital, medical reserve corps that did, in fact, work at the marathon. We've been volunteering for a number of years. Then to the investigative piece, those are different skill sets. Something to think about.
Time is another thing. Time of transfer must be accurate.
Can you give us an example, time of transfer?
Well,
Being
for
a-
instance, EMS uses a time when they show up at the ER. It's all documented. Same when they return to quarters. It's all documented. It goes into a log, a written log, or a computerized log. And I think the transfer of command, so if there's any question in the future, that has to be documented.
Terrific. Accountability, transferring of command, again, the documentation. In some emergency disaster responses, when we think about some of these widespread natural disasters, tsunami, or even Japan with the man-made, the nuclear accident, that there may not be any facilities to record that information. But if we're able to record by hand and transfer that information, it could be oral, it could be handwritten, before we are able to have the luxury of electricity and computers. That's very important. On June 1st, I kept a log, and I'm not sure if I kept that piece of paper, but I had a legal pad, and I just would put the time, 6:04, blah, 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 and I just kept a log of what I was doing, and we were able to submit that to FEMA as part of the hours that were worked and get some reimbursement for that. So it helped me to be able to remember, as things are moving very quickly, something that was said or done literally 60 seconds before can change. And to be able to go back and put those pieces together, if we can track it, it's very helpful.
And in the heat of the moment, it's easy to forget.
In the heat of the moment, it sure is easy to forget. Sometimes you want to forget. Unity of command is when folks report to only one incident supervisor, and they receive work assignments only from the assigned supervisor, which I think goes back to Mary's point of folks showing up, I'm in charge, do what I say, up, and things get very confused. With planning, basically this is management by objectives. We have an IAP, an incident action plan, modular chunks of groups working together, practicing our life safety code, incident stabilization, property, environment, preservation. ICS organization differs from day-to-day organizational structure and positions because we have positions, we have titles, and organizational structures. Some of you may work in, I'm coming from a background in human services and education. It's a lot of collaborative work. And certainly in a public school, let's say there might be a lead teacher, there might be the assistant principal, the superintendent. There is a hierarchy. But there might be 50 faculty members that see themselves all on the same level in peers. So we have different positions within ICS. It's chunked into smaller groups. We will put our personnel assigned to jobs based on their expertise, not their rank. So I may respond to a request for deployment. There are young people at a school where an incident has happened. We're looking for MRC volunteers who can provide some psychological first aid. I show up, Department of Mental Health crisis team has already arrived. They don't need me to do any kind of counseling, but they really need me to register the parents who are coming in so they can start to put parents and students together. So I might be doing the secretarial work, I might be doing the greeting, I might be helping people filling the toilet paper rolls or the paper towels in the bathrooms. Bang on this one more time. Incident command, it's modular. The size and scopes are intended to be able to build up and to also be able to contract. IAP, we talked about the planning piece, the transferring of the command, transferring of information, the activities, the time frames, operational periods, can be oral or written. What we want in an IAP, and this is what our professional responders, when I said that this ICS that you're receiving today is just really a little taste and an introduction, you'll really drill down very, very deeply into what the components are in an IAP. Who's doing what, who's responsible for doing it. FEMA has produced forms for all of these different pieces that our incident commanders will use. How are we communicating, and what are the procedures if someone is injured, if some other situation occurs within a secondary explosion, how are we then going to be able to ramp up and to divert and to move to that piece. Span of control, the visual here again, not too many people or resources attached to one supervisor, but chunked in a way. I would like to think about 3 to 7, 5 to 7 subordinates. Optimally, it does not exceed 5. In our region with, again, a lot of volunteers we lean on in our communities. Sometimes that does expand a little bit more. Facilities and resources. I'm going to skip over this and just invite you again to go to FEMA.gov. There are these self-paced, all sorts of incident command system. There's incident command system for school, incident command system for hospital settings, medical centers, and you might find something. Maybe you're a student at the university, different types of pieces that focus specifically on what's going on with your life, your career, and you can get a little more information there. Any questions? Resources. Our resources are defined as our personnel, major equipment items, supplies, facilities available or potentially available for assignment to an incident operations and for which status is maintained. So that simply goes back to accountability, resources, logistics. What do we have? What do we need? How are we going to get it? How are we going to replenish it? So we want to be able to categorize resources. Just think about an annual flu clinic. Let's say a flu clinic is at your council on aging. 75 people come from 9 to 11 in the morning. They get their flu shot. Well, a lot of equipment has been used. Gloves, syringes, right?
Sharps containers.
The sharp containers, exactly. What else?
Privacy screens.
Privacy screens.
Barriers that tell people where to go and come. The registration table.
The registration table, the rest table afterwards. Perhaps there were refreshments that were made available.
An AED is in a first aid kit.
An AED and a first aid kit.
Cough, all of that.
Right. All the medical supplies, the alcohol swabs, right? All of that. So now that's gone. Those are one and done, right? Hand sanitizers. So being able to categorize that and then to be able to reorder and to replenish, having a system in place is very important. Also for tracking, recovery, and reimbursement. Communications before an incident is critical to develop an integrated voice and data communication systems, and that's what we have done with our MRC. When you are on the MRC, and for instance, Hampshire County, Michael will send an email perhaps to you, let you know there's a training at UMass Amherst on Thursday, April 10th, and you will all get that blast email. You may or may not be asked to respond. Sometimes we do little drills where we ask people to respond so we can assess how many people could I realistically get in a 12-hour period, or if we needed to start in 24 hours, how many people would realistically reply? 50%, 10%, 80%? So if you get some of those alerts, those are important for us. And accountability, dispatch, and deployment. We want to ask you to please remember to check in. We want you to encourage you to ask about the incident action plan. What are the expectations? What are your job roles? And who's in charge? What is the span of control? How do you fit in the pieces? Ask questions. And track any kind of resources that you might use. I hope we can all answer that. Because we said so. Alrighty, let me see if I can pick up the pace here a little bit and just go through what our incident commander, couple of descriptions of these functions. The incident command is going to be establishing the incident objectives, strategies, and priorities. Ideally, this is not going to be something that's done in isolation. Yes, it is similar to a CEO, but that incident commanders, their skills are preferable to be able to bring information. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you needing? Pull the information together to then be able to put a plan together. Working with the operations people, determine the tactics and the resources for achieving your objectives. So that's the in the field, what are you actually doing? You're clearing debris, highway. Law enforcement, you're keeping it safe or keeping people from entering into an area. Planning collects and analyzes information. What is the weather pattern? How is it going to be shifting? How is that going to be changing? Bring that information in. We have 5 different fire departments that are through mutual aid or deploying to this incident. How are they working together? Track those resources, maintain the documents. Logistics. Responders need to have food and water. They need to be toileted. They need to be able to have their oxygen tanks refilled. They need to have their needs supplied. So logistics, we're going to be taking care of not only those who are impacted victims, but also responders, helpers, etc. And finance and administration, again, really, this was always thought of as, way down the line. You're really concerned about the life and the safety of folks, but the importance of the accountability and the finance really can't be understated because that's what we need to be able to sustain to move forward. IC is responsible for everything. The command, the ops, the planning, logistics, finance, and administration. That doesn't mean they do everything. In a small incident, an incident commander, small, a single incident, car accident, one person might be the entire response. Large scale, they're not going to be the ones that's delivering the water. Okay, we need to have someone in that position who has experience and who can establish the command at the beginning of the incident. Why? Because we need to be able to set things out to plan and to systemically approach our response. The incident commander really needs to have the skill of delegating. And many of us who are helpers, that's a real challenge. To not get in there, because you know you can do it. You know you could probably do it faster and better many times. We need to be able to delegate, and we need to stay within those boundaries. These sections are only created if needed. We don't need a finance department if we're dealing with the car that hit the water, the fire hydrant, and that exploded. Safety, 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 safety. Did I mention safety? It's all about safety. And information. Information internally up and down through our command and externally to the public, to policy makers, to other stakeholders, maintaining liaison with other agencies. Could be a deputy involved, and that might be the person who steps in if an incident commander is unavailable. Command staff, we have our PIO, our safety officer. Is the impacted area contained? Is it safe? We lost 2 souls this week, Boston firefighters. They go into areas that are unsafe. And that's their job. And they will tell us that's their job. Their commanders have protocols and they do everything they can to reduce their own risk. But there is risk. A safety officer would be a person who has an understanding of the facility, the biochemical, the technological, the medical, health, pandemic vectors, has an understanding of that, and is able to communicate the how, the when, and the where. Yes, it's safe. No, it's safe. You can go to this area or not. Sometimes it's a person who has some engineering or structural construction knowledge, so they can understand if, can responders go into a certain area? When is it safe for the public to return? Sir?
Just one quick thing. They never tell you in these charts. The safety officer is the only person that can ever override an incident command. And if the safety officer says to do something, they're the boss.
Does that make sense to
Everybody
folks?
should know that. Because
Right.
you have incidents where the safety officer says, nope, we don't do that.
And in a sense, when we think about that, maybe in like a military organizational piece, that would be the person who would then, having the superior officer standing down. And public health is also in that role. Many folks don't realize the power that your boards of health have. They're more powerful than boards of selectmen, even though folks think of the selectmen as kind of the CEOs of a community. Boards of health have some very critical life-saving decision and authority. Liaison officer, just a term that's not too frequently heard or understood, assisting in the incident commander by serving as a point of contact with other representatives from response organizations. So as we've talked about different scenarios where it ramps up and there are different departments, different jurisdictions, both government, non-government, community, faith-based, et cetera, having someone to help coordinate those pieces. So hopefully you can identify the 5 major ICS management functions and the position titles with those command staff, understand the role and the function of an incident commander, and the role of the command staff, and most importantly, what your own role might be, where you would fit, and to ask those questions. For this little unit here, we want to be able to talk a little bit about and to define our unified command, understand what the advantages of unified command are, and what are some of our primary features. Tornadoes. West Springfield, Springfield, Munson for Western Mass. And of course it went into Brimfield and Sturbridge. Brimfield's funny. It's a 413 area code, but some of its leanings are towards Central Mass, and some of it's really the cusp of the line where things begin and end for Central and Western Mass. Bob Hassett is a fabulous gentleman. He has many years of experience. He is the emergency management director for the city of Springfield. And every day is a crisis in Springfield. Springfield, Holyoke, some of our communities are challenged with some very basic, health and safety issues on a daily basis, critical. So he's challenged and he's tasked all the time. Now, this guy's amazing because he's got a great sense of humor, and he's kind of laid back, and how he manages to put this all together is pretty incredible. I was the emergency management director when the tornadoes hit in June for Munson. And about day 4 out of the tornadoes, Bob called me, and I, for some reason, was able to hear him a bit on my compromised cell phone. And he's like, "Kath, how you doing?" It's Bob. "What do you mean, how am I doing? I'm dying here. I can't even, so overwhelmed, just completely can't even put into words. Stunned, overwhelmed, shocked. We were just operating out of, just reflex. And he said, "Yeah, I was thinking about you." And he goes, "I got 4 of me here." And I'm like, meaning he had a deputy and he had someone else that could step up for another shift and this type of thing. And he was pretty much working around the clock too. But the point being is Springfield was managing its own response. Little town of Munson was managing its own response. West Springfield was managing its own response. Now, MEMA, our Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, was present in each. We had tremendous help. The first responders were so amazing. In Enfield and Suffield and Connecticut Fire and everything were called in because they were called in. They didn't just show up as part of mutual aid, and they did these amazingly unified and coordinated pieces with the state, and then the National Guard came in, and all of these different levels. But there was no talking between West Springfield, and Munson. And I remember it's the first time that we didn't have a unified command. And we looked at that, 30 days later, when we decided, this needs to end. It was 30 days and 30 nights, folks. Hundreds of people were displaced living in the Mass Mutual Center and living at, at the Big E. And we finally said to them, "Listen, July 4th is coming. We're exhausted. You need to find housing." And there were a lot of resources being put into place for that housing. We get into July and August and September, and we start putting some of our data together and looking back at this. And why was there no unified command? We hadn't been through it before. We just hadn't been through it before. Will there be one next time? You bet. The benefits are being able to share understanding of priorities and restrictions. So when you don't have television, when you don't have radio, when you're 18 hours in a disaster that it looks like a bomb has gone off, you look like you've been it feels like you're in a war zone. You can't imagine that your life was ever pleasant before or that it will ever be pleasant again. You can't even imagine what normal trees look like or leaves or grass, and it's a god-awful mess. To be able to get information from other communities and to realize you're not alone is an enormous piece, as well as just the plain facts are helpful to get information on what one region is doing that is successful, what another region is doing. Put together the single incident objectives. We did not have that. Collaborative strategies. Oh, so Red Cross was going here and there and there, and their coordination wasn't coordinated. Improve the internal-external information flow. Tremendous amount of information coming through. The Republican had on the front page what the Red Cross was doing, what was happening in Springfield. Not so much West Springfield. You got a couple little tidbits about Munson, but media covers certain information. Without a unified command, the full picture was not being put forward through a single channel. Less duplication of efforts. Better utilization of resources. So when you have unified command, that's when we can co-locate and set up facilities. So let's say the same scenario, West Springfield, Springfield, Munson. If we had set up some type of a command center in Springfield where representatives from those other communities, if Hampshire County had been involved, representatives from those communities would be involved, we'd be able to share information much more accurately and much more timely. Be able to put that incident action plan together and an integrated staff so that, again, we know who's on first. This might take this is a visual of how unified command is that ICS, the simple incident command, but magnified to a larger scale, where you might have hazmat. Is anyone not familiar with the term hazmat? Hazardous materials, okay? You're not supposed to know all these things. So if you don't, if they're acronyms you don't know, it's because we don't have it as part of the regular vernacular. Incident commander, public works might be involved. We know public works, oh my gosh, I love my DPW guys. They're amazing. Not only do they help the first responders be able to get access to an area by clearing the debris, but their work, their often unappreciated and often unrewarded work is so vital. When you think about the environmental impacts, you think about removing debris. Refrigerators in June that don't have power, there's some really smelly, nasty freezers and fridges that had to be cleaned out. And that's just the small scale. When you put all of that rubbish and the sanitation component with public health, huge. So let's finish up with this one on this part. What are some of the barriers? What might make it difficult to implementing a unified command? Egos. Yes, we mentioned egos. Absolutely. My town, I'm in charge. Who do you think you are? And I had a very well-meaning, and I do believe she was probably highly skilled, a woman from I'll just call it a faith-based organization, came up from the South. And she was in Munson about 72 hours, 72 hours after it hit. And she walked up to me, and she wanted to know what she was going to be doing, where I was going to be placing her. And quite frankly, we weren't that organized on day 3 to know what her job description was going to be, where I was going to place her. I'd never met her before. And she was so upset because she had come all that way, had not been asked, had not been deployed, right? Self-deployed, came all that way, and she had so many, and she would rattle off the emergencies or disasters that she'd responded to, and I had no doubt that this woman was absolutely fantastic. But those command issues, I am who I am, and this is what I was told I'm supposed to do and where I'm going, that's a big part of it. And sometimes there are misunderstandings, not just, egos are, it's a misunderstanding. I was told, I have my orders, read it, here it is. It says this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And for our region, we hadn't practiced it. It's as simple as we hadn't practiced it. Why? Because tornadoes happen in Oz. They don't happen in Munson. Right? That was the thinking. Tornadoes happen, Dorothy knows all about the, Toto knows about the, Southampton, East Hampton, South Hadley, Granby, your town, my town, any one of us, we know there's climate change. We know the water table has significantly changed in Massachusetts, right here underneath us now. And why do we care about that? Because when it rains, which is going to be raining relentlessly for the rest of the afternoon into tomorrow and the next day, that changes everything around flooding. Flooding means water, sewer, overflow, spillage. And we get into public health. Very, very complicated. So we hadn't planned it, and we hadn't practiced it, and we hadn't had an exercise, and we hadn't had a drill to say, okay, now, if this thing happened and Northampton, Amherst, West Hampton, and Holyoke are all impacted, ooh, some of you are in Hampshire County, Holyoke, you're Hampden County, are we going to talk to you? Have we figured that out? Will we do it differently? It remains to be seen. And a JIC, or Joint Information Center, is, again, coming back to how many different jurisdictions can come together and put together a unified and credible and accurate voice. What time were we scheduled to break for lunch? Is it right about now?
We hadn't scheduled a specific time.
Okay.
We need a few minutes to set it up.
Well, you can start setting up, and I'm going to finish our last unit here, if that works for you.
Everybody ready for lunch?
Sure they are.
I thought I'd ask in case you're stuffed with bagels like I am.
Okay, putting it all together. ICS requires that you be accountable for abiding by policies, procedures, and guidelines. When in doubt, leave it out. Working on objectives that are outlined in the incident action plan. And this is not about you as an MRC volunteer not expressing your thoughts, your opinions, your experience. That's not what this is about at all. But it's offering that information, but understanding that there's going to be some information and priorities that are set perhaps further up the food chain that are important for us to comply with. We work on objectives, ensure unity of command and chain of command by taking directions from your incident supervisor, and managing your stress and being professional during an incident. Do you know, this is for each one of you to think about, and before you leave today, I'll ask you to either ask me, Michael, or Jackie, or Mary, what are the procedures for being deployed? We want you to be clear on that. That's the most common question that I have with MRC volunteers. It's not really about, yeah, I'm willing, I'm ready, okay, but how will I know? How are you going to let me know what I'm going to do and where I'm going to go? And why would you know if you haven't done it before, right? So let's find out about that. Check in at the incident scene again. Ask for a briefing. What's going on? What are my job responsibilities? Do you have a job action sheet outlined for me? And if we don't have paper available, sometimes writing up on a wall, on a painting on a piece of wood, debris cleanup group, that's the cot setup group, inside shelter. Know your co-workers, know who is affiliated, and have eyes open for each other, for your own personal safety and for the safety of others. If you notice that one of your team members is not acting appropriately or seems to have additional distress and needs help, either if you're comfortable, you can talk to them yourself or bring it to the unit coordinator's attention. Know your operational periods and the safety procedures. We do want to keep records. We want to try to be able to have a written log, badges. We don't, in the MRC, we don't use military time. That was the FEMA slide. Have you assembled a go kit? So the go kit is what you need if you need to evacuate, what your personal items are that you need to take with you. Flashlights, toothbrush, some first aid, a cold pack, perhaps you have some medicine, some matches, putting them into a backpack, a go kit for yourself, for the little people in your lives, for the older folks in your lives, so that it's there and it's ready to go out the door. And my most vital tool, from which I live for, is my Blistex Lip Medics. I want this with me at all times. Some folks can relate, others I'm sure can't, but if you're needing to stay in place, shelter in place, the 72-hour kits, 3 days supply, food, water, medicine for you, your family members, your pets. How much water is recommended for each person?
Minimum gallon a day per person.
Thank you. 1 gallon of water per day per person. So if you have a family of 6, you have 2 dogs and 3 cats, stock up. You don't have to do it all at once either. Start with one thing at a time. Demobilization is the term that we use at the end of the assignment. Is when we complete our tasks and we fill out any kinds of forms or reports. We look at what supplies were used that need to be replenished. put in our timelines as far as what we have spent and where we have spent it, bring that information to supervisors and any other kinds of checkout procedures. Sometimes it will be important for you as an MRC volunteer, for me, to be able to check in with our peers and do a little bit of a debriefing on what it is you've seen, you've heard, you've smelled, and you've experienced as you're starting to leave and to get grounded. And we will talk more about that as we move into psychological first aid. So that's our record-keeping phase. So make it work. It works when we follow the chain of command. It works when we report our critical information. And it works when we wait to be dispatched.